G'day guys and welcome to Comics to Movies and More. I am your host, Sean Keenan, and as always I have Stephen along with me, and tonight we've got an extra special guest, Nima. Is that how I pronounce it, Nima? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's spot on. Yep.
Sweet. Thanks, he's here to do a cool draw. If you cannot see in the background already, he's created a glow-in-the-dark comic book, which looks, I kid you not, fucking awesome, which I think is cool. So he's going to do a giveaway on the show, which is what a way to kick off our show. And then we've got the guys from Reverie Publishing in Australia. We've got a bunch of guys on the show tonight, so we are super excited. We will not be doing any reviews. I've just done a movie marathon about the Star Wars movie marathon today, so I am pumped. I'm excited. I've got all Star Wars down, even down to the baby Yoda socks. So Nima, over to you, man. Do you want to quickly give us a spiel about your comic? I'm not even going to you, Stephen. I'm not even going to you. Go straight to, do you want to give us a bit of a spiel about your comic, and then we'll go into the draw?
Yeah. I'll keep it nice and short, but yeah, basically it's the world's first glow-in-the-dark comic book, full-length glow-in-the-dark comic book. I'm sure some of you will remember, especially those of us with grey hairs in our beards. Back in the 90s, there used to be glow-in-the-dark covers. Right?
Yeah.
But one of my mates used to read the Spectre. DC Comics, the Spectre had glow-in-the-dark covers, and I asked him, I said, "Oh, mate, does this have glow-in-the-dark on the inside?" He's like, "Nah, just the cover." So I think that stayed in the back of my head, all those years. So when it came time to put my comic out, I thought, do something no one's ever done before, full-length glow-in-the-dark comic.
That is cool. That is cool. So what are we giving away tonight? What is the draw that you are giving away on this awesome show tonight that you are giving to your fans or backers?
Yeah, so we used a viral campaign for Akira to kind of get the crowd pumped and get people backers there on day one, and luckily they turned up and we fully funded, so it's pretty awesome. So some of those will be watching tonight.
What were your final numbers, just curiously?
We had almost 300 backers, 289, so which is cool.
That's 11 more, and then you could say, that's still fantastic.
Well, don't rub it in, mate. Come on. He's our guest on our show.
Hey, pre-orders are still open, so,
You're just rubbing it in there.
Pre-orders still count, right?
I apologize for my co-host here. He speaks out of turn, and yeah.
Moira's on the chat, so she'll come back.
Sorry, Moira. Sorry.
So we're giving away all 6 volumes of Akira, the new 4K disc and Blu-ray, and some Akira like figurines as well. It's pretty awesome. So shall we do it?
Yeah, awesome. Let me do full screen. There we go.
Full screen. All right, I'm going to press the button, draw, and it's going to draw our winner. Hopefully the computer won't crash. Pretty exciting. All right, so this is our stowed, actually probably Deegan. Let's just say Deegan. He's our winner. Oh, yes, and he's a registered subscriber, so it's actually a legitimate win.
Well,
so congratulations to Deegan. Yeah, you're the winner.
Congratulations, mate. That is amazing. So,
well, look, thank you so much for allowing us to do the draw. It's a live draw, as everybody knows, so it's all legitimate,
Yep.
So I'm really happy for Deegan. I entered too, so yeah, I'm really disappointed I didn't get drawn.
Sorry. He failed to tell me that, Nima. I do. This is just what I found out on air now, that he's entered the draw and really he wanted to win. So
yeah, how sus would have that looked if Steve won it? He's like, "You're the winner."
Hey.
This is why I wanted to do it live, mate, so he could go, "Oh, but it was live. It wasn't me. I didn't do it."
Yeah, but pre-orders are still open, so if you didn't back it, there's still time. 3filecomics.com/break. You can go in there, and they'll be open for a few more months. until the finalized book will get sent to the printer. I just wanted to give people a bit of a window. They won't get all the perks they would have got of the campaign, but you can still get the book.
Awesome. If you want to chuck that in the private chat, mate, I will stick it up on all of our links as well. So now you're welcome to stick around if you want and be our special co-host tonight if you want, or you can jump off at any stage. But I'm going to bring out our first guest, who is the man, the myth, the legend, Gary Della, who has been doing comics for probably longer than I've been alive. I don't know whether that's a compliment or an insult, Gary, so I do apologize. But Gary, how are you today, man?
Oh, awesome. It's great to be here.
Gary.
Yeah. How you going, everybody? Yeah.
So if people don't know Australian comics, can you just give them a little bit of a background on yourself and your publishing company, and some of the guys that you work with? Because Stephen and I, being in the Australian industry, we know who you are and look up to you. So if you can give us a bit of a rundown on your history.
Look, we'll just do it briefly, but basically we put out a comic titled Reverie in 1983. Now, this particular one come out, there was a group of us just got around the couch and said, what are we going to do? We were all into comics. We all collected them. Mind you, I collected them at the time, and my collection was sold to get a deposit on my first house. So that's how much we used to collect comics at the time, so that's just one of the interesting aspects of it. So we all got around this the couch in the room, and we said, what are we going to do? So we come up with this comic called Reverie, which at the time was an A5 little comic, and says, well, we've got it already, what are we going to do with it? So we got a distributor in Australia to distribute it. We printed about 2,500 of them, and by the time that went through the system, we did a second one, and we got a little bit more serious, so we made it an A4 size comic and continued down the track. That A5 comic sold out, and we were just all shocked. We just said, well, what happened? So we said, all right, let's keep going with it. So we kept on going with it, and the only biggest problem that we had at the time, because we folded, we put the comic on hold basically when it got to issue 7, because the distributor we had wouldn't come up with the details and the sales for a couple of years afterwards. Mind you, in the meantime, what was happening to help on the cost, and back then you had to do everything. You had to do the bromides, you had to do the lettering. It was that sort of task that you had to do. But in my case, I got to the point where, okay, well, if we're going to have to do that, I'm going to print it. So I bought myself a web offset printer. Now, this web offset printer, we were in a weatherboard house in Riddles Creek, and this offset printer just rides one Saturday, which we weren't expecting. We weren't even ready for it. And believe it or not, they backed this big semi up the driveway. The crane lifted it up. I got the chainsaw out, chainsawed the side of the building. Not the wall just fell down. We had it on a thing, and we just went, we just swung it, and it just went plonk. We leveled it where it landed, and that's where we put it. And it was, we thought, oh no, we've damaged it, but at least it's inside. But it worked out fine. So, the process was just one of those things. And in those days, when we printed it, we had to fold them, we had to staple them, we had to cut them, and they were 2 or 3 weeks by the time you did. And that stage we were printing 5,000 of them.
Wow.
Doing them as well, you see. So, we did all right. We did pretty good out of it. But because of the time it took to find out how much it actually sold, our issue 7 was our biggest seller, because I overran the print run about, I think it was about 6,000 or something. But we basically sold over 5,000 of those. And the very, very good thing about it was that from the distributor, we'll get the full comics back. In those days, what most people did is that they cut off the tops, sent the tops back to get the credits from the distributor. We were very lucky. We got most of them back. And what was worked out from those ones, they either went to Canada or they went to England.
Wow.
So we well out of them, yeah. But anyway, that's so there was a bit of a hiatus between that one and 3 years ago and in between that time, don't get me wrong, there was people asking, when are you going to bring some more out? When are you going to bring Reverie out? When are you going to do this? So we got to the point 3 years ago. We said, all right, we'll give it a go. We'll put out Reverie again as a large 144-page comic and just see what happens. However, we put it out. It sold on Kickstarter. It went well. And what we realised was that at the time, a trade paperback over 100 pages, it's just, you can't manage it. It's not something that you should do. So you should keep it below the 50 or 100 mark, or even around the 80, 70, 80. So that's a learning we did. So we went back to the drawing board and put Reverie, which will come out this year sometime, as a 52-page comic, which will come out. I've got a few slides of that. I can give you a bit of an idea what the new one's going to look like. So that'll be interesting.
Definitely, I'd love to. So who's working on this? The next, I actually have a copy of your 120-page one. I really enjoyed reading it.
Yep.
Who's working on this new one? Because I know there's so much stuff in between. Are they like? Is it like those Japanese Jump magazines where a story will continue from one issue to the next, short stories, or is it anthologies or once-off? What's your plan for all the stories within the next issue?
I'll put the covers up if you want to show them. What's happening is the new series is what we found with the original one was that we put up a couple of continuous stories in it, and we found that because of the Australian market, everybody's working and they're mostly doing their comics on the side or as a hobby. It's hard to get people to finish off some of the work in time for a regular sort of publishing event. So what we did this time is we've gone back to the drawing board. We've put out issue 1, which you can see up on the screen. Issue 2 is we've done that. But the continuous stories that we have in this one are now all complete, and they will be continued and completed. So that's where we've decided that it's probably best in the long run. So that's going to be very interesting to see what people make of the new one. And
nice.
Some of the artists that we have that are joining us and continue to join us are absolutely awesome. The writers are awesome.
Well, we've got some people waiting in the wings. Should we bring out a couple of other people so that they can join the conversation?
Yeah, no, you sure? Yeah, definitely, because everybody.
Now, I'm just going to go in the order on my screen. So this is by no far the importance of any of your creators, because they're all just as important as one another. But we're going to bring out Hayden. How you going, mates?
Hey guys, how are we?
Rob, how you going today, mate? Thanks for joining us, guys. So can you tell me, Rob, first, your background and how you fit into the publication?
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, go ahead. Can you hear us?
You can't hear us, can you, Rob?
Can you hear us?
No, you can't hear us.
You can't hear us. Well, we'll go to Hayden. This is the best thing about doing something live.
I know.
Hayden, mate, how you going? Can you give us
I can do this easy because it's right below me. Below.
That's easy. A little bit of background about what you do and how you fit in with the publication.
Yeah, sure. My origin story doesn't date back nearly as far as Gary's, but so yeah, I'm a publishing student at RMIT, but I've been writing comics since 2017 is when I started. So fairly recent, and then so I self-published my first book, which is called Chimera. It's a 3-issue miniseries, I guess you would call it. The second 2 will be out this year. It's been a slow process, but that's comics, right? But I met Gary at a meetup in the city probably 2018, I want to say. Could be wrong. But he saw the first book. He saw Chimera issue 1, and I guess he liked what he saw. So we started talking, and he brought me on board for Reverie, and he's helping me publish the rest of that book. But not only that, he's he's got me on quite a number of projects as well, and it's all sort of very exciting. Those are the 3 issues. So the first one's been out a little while, but the second 2 will be out sort of in very quick succession in the coming months.
Nice.
Doing the artwork for this.
So he's a bloke called Mark Oliver. He actually lives in Brazil. Met him on, I can't even remember what forum it was on. I met him on a creators group online somewhere.
As we all do, mate. As we all do.
Yeah. It's the world we live in, eh?
That's awesome. And so, is this the first thing that you've published, or have you done some other things as well?
So this was probably I'm just trying to think. I think it was the first thing I ever sort of published, self-published or otherwise. I'm an essayist as well, so I've got some essays published out there as well. But yeah, I pretty much am very sort of, I guess I'm still fresh in the comics. I've written a lot, but as we all know, the rate of them coming out can, waver. So
yes,
always
I
working on
think
stuff.
the biggest thing with the indie scene is that ability to kind of put stuff out on a regular basis is probably the hardest thing that we all face, because as Gary touched on before, we kind of do this as not really our
It's a passion. It's a passion. It's not a day job.
Right? So
Absolutely.
There is look. There's 2 questions I'm going to ask you. The first one is if you want to give a bit more background on Chimera, I would definitely want to hear the plot, where you see it going, and that's the first question I'm going to ask you. But the next one I would probably mention, and it's much more for, say, an indie publisher, because we also want to touch a little bit on publishing in Australia. There is a certain trend, especially, let's say, US comics. The number 1 issue is the highest selling, usually. And then what tends to happen is, as the series progresses through, sales dip. And that's just the trend on mainly US publishing comics. And we know why. Number 1 is exciting, it's the hype. People buy into it. And then some people might not find it very exciting and they drop off. But for indie publishing, is actually the reverse. Volume 1 of a new property tends to be okay, and it gets by. But I look, we've got all the trends I can show you. Number 2 generally tends to do better than number 1. Number 3 tends to do better than number 2 and number 1, and it tends to build that way. So that's more for Gary, but I'll start with Hayden's question. Tell us about your book.
Okay. So Chimera, as I said, I wrote all 3 scripts back in 2017 and 2018. So it's this really interesting thing that I'm finding is sort of a recurring thing, and it's not a negative or a positive, but you find that the things that you write, by the time they come out, you get an artist on board if you're lucky, and you get it out in front of people if you're really lucky. And by the time it is out, you've written maybe maybe a half a dozen more scripts in that time. And it's this really strange, humbling experience to look back at that work and think, you're a better writer than you were when you wrote that. But that's just sort of the process of growth and being a creator. So I guess Chimera is.
I cry when I read the first XCT now. I'm like, oh my God, that is horrible. That is so bad. It's but I think the flip side of that and the good side of that is people can actually see you progress. They can actually see, how much better your writing is getting, and how much the stories are evolving and that type of stuff as well. So, but what I'm going to do quickly is I'm going to bring out our other 2 guests that have been sitting in the wings. So we've got Dave DeVries. Is that how I pronounce it, mate? Is that correct?
DeVries.
Sorry, mate. I do apologise. I'm
That's all right.
shocking with names and probably should never be allowed to host anything in my life. And Peter, thanks for having a nice, easy name, Peter Lawson. So, g'day, guys. How are you going?
G'day.
Thanks for coming on the show. Dave, I'll start with you. Are you able just to give us a little bit of a background of yourself and how you fit in with the publication and everything like that?
Sure. I got started in comics back in the early 80s. I created a bunch of superheroes called the Southern Squadron, which were first appeared on Oz Comics. And then when Cyclone got started, Southern Squadron then moved over to to Cyclone. Cyclone was an anthology book which lasted basically until we got to book 8, and then what we actually did was continued the numbering on, but the Southern Squadron then took over the title, and for the same reasons as you guys are just talking about, that we didn't want to lose that 8-issue run. We didn't want to go back to number 1. Like Gary, we were publishing in the newsstands, and we had I think at its height we got up to something like around about 10,000 distribution in Australia, and then another 5 going elsewhere. Southern Squadron did very well, so it eventually then got marketed into America through Malibu Graphics. They then repackaged a lot of the material. We did some crossovers with Grimjack and Boris the Bear, and I then started to do a lot of work for DC and Marvel Comics. Probably the thing I'm best known for in Australia would be the Phantom, the Marvel version of the Phantom that came out in the 90s. I sort of stuck with comics as comic books until the mid-90s, and then myself and another member of the Cyclone team, Glenn Lumsden, we were both at this point relocated from there we are. So we were relocated from Sydney in 2 different jumps to South Australia. I ended up in the Barossa, and as did Glenn, and we started working for Picture and People and those sorts of magazines. This is when those magazines were just going gangbusters, and this was about the same time that Marvel Comics actually went into bankruptcy, and we found that we sort of moved into the sort of shorter form of newspaper strips and magazine strips, and part of the reason for that was also I was getting into film and television, and since then I've been, I guess for the last 15 years, I've been more a film director than a comic book creator. But in the last couple of years, I'm sort of getting back into writing comics. And so I've got a couple of crossover projects coming up. And the first crossover project was one that Gary and I talked about doing. I liked what he was doing with Torn. And a lot of what Reverie's doing is very similar to what the Cyclone guys were doing back in the 80s. And so originally it was just going to be like a one project, but it looks as though the Southern Squadron is going to find a regular home with Reverie, which I think is going to be very exciting. So it's a pity that Rob's not here, but Rob and I have just finished a 3-part, written the scripts for a 3-part Torn Southern Squadron crossover, which was really interesting. Oh, he's coming back, so that's great.
Can you hear us now, Rob?
Hey, we can hear you.
Yeah,
that wasn't embarrassing at all. It was like, hey, and then I was like, oh, great.
They were just building you up as well. So it was a great timing that you just jumped straight in there. So
I just want to make my own entrance. Here I am.
And it was a lot of fun working with them, so it was quite a challenge to sort of meld the 2 concepts together in such a way that so it could work as though Torn was a guest character in the Southern Squadron book, or vice versa, so that every character held their own weight. And the other thing that was really important was that we wanted to maintain the voice of all the characters, so that people who had read a Torn book would feel that it still felt like a Torn book, but people coming in who'd known the Southern Squadron in the past would feel it like we'd captured the same spirit there as well. So that was a little bit of a challenge to find that voice, but once we did, it was amazing how quickly it all went down. And I think it's like anything else. Once you've had some success with the process, at the end of it, we almost wanted to go and do another set, So we'll see what happens. But But it'll be very exciting to see the Southern Squadron coming back, because I think this is their 38th year, which is frightening when I think about it. So
wow.
And-
Would that have to be one of the longest, like Australian-made characters that's around? 38 years?
There's a couple a bit older. Dark Nebula came out. Squadron came out in '83. Dark Nebula came out in '82. So next year will be Dark Nebula's 40th. Brainmaster and Vixen by Gerald Carr. They were around in the 70s. So that would probably be, to the best of my knowledge, the longest running. But then there's a little bit of a cheat there, because, for example, in the Southern Squadron, there was a character called Colonel Rivers, which was actually, I got to know John Dixon quite well, and so Colonel Rivers was kind of the Ralph Rivers alter ego of the Crimson Comet, who was I guess a golden /silver age character from I think he was the late 40s, early 50s. So there was an ability to sort of connect back to that period as well. So there's a really rich heritage of Australian comics, which I know Gary's very sort of keen to see preserved and to develop. And I think this is one of the attractions of bringing the Southern Squadron into Torn's sort of universe, is that it then taps into those characters, and also, when I say those, I mean the Squadron characters, and they all had crossovers with a lot of characters in the 1980s and 90s. So, you know, they sort of start to get almost like a little Aussie superhero universe emerging, which is, I think, very exciting.
That is very cool. That is very cool, because growing up, you know, I'm a '90s comic boy. You know, late '80s, early '90s. You know, for me, it was all about going into the city, going to Minotaur and buying the Marvel ones, or even at that stage, they still had them in the newsagents and everything. But, you know, I didn't really know that there was an Australian scene that was actually still around and publishing during that time. So now being involved in the scene is really exciting to kind of have you guys come back and be involved in the scene again, and kind of help us guys that have, you know, want to crazily get into this this organization or this business and create, you know, some cool Aussie comics. So I think the cool thing about your characters with that they actually are Australian based, where you know, I think a lot of us sometimes fall into the trap of telling stories outside of Australia. Like, a lot of my stories are not based around Australia, which I think is really cool with the Southern Squadron, is that it is actually an Australian based team and series as well, type of thing. So yeah. Peter,
sorry.
I was going to say, Peter, can you just give us a quick introduction and what you're doing over at Reverie?
Right, Gary got me on Reverie as the initial artist on Torn, and I'm sort of running the first edition of that one with the art. That's actually my first comic off the bat. So, like you were saying before about the writing process and how you look at the first one and you get better and better and better, I'm finding the same thing. It's every issue, hopefully, sort of try to step it up and get better with each one. And it's really quite fun to sort of work on, like with Dave, truly Australian characters.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of your pinups there. Like, I know you put like I think someone in the chat also mentioned it, Wonder Woman pinup that you do, and I see a lot of that. How do you enjoy drawing those iconic characters as well? Because I've seen your Torn work, but how do you do a lot of Marvel and DC stuff as well. Do you enjoy doing all those characters?
That's for relaxation. Comic pages, doing a comic page, doing the sequential art and off a script I didn't write as well, it's hard. And I'm still getting my head around how to go about that. And every now and then you sort of forget why I like to draw. So it's good to just, as a cat there, you just sort of, it's good to sit back and do something like that, or Wonder Woman again, and just have fun with it.
We had another guest there for a second.
He's yeah.
Time a dog will appear.
I wish that was you know, not a common occurrence, but
I think that's the you know, I don't know if anyone's seen the videos during COVID of all the cats or dogs or children that come in. I've done a couple of live streams where my little girl will just come in and start talking. I'm like, no, Daddy's on the on the internet. So that's always funny. And Rob, not last but least, but can you tell us about yourself? I did build you up before, but I didn't hear a word we were saying. So,
I've just been writing and drawing basically my whole life. Out of high school, I focused on music. I was and still am to a certain extent, a musician. I was in a band, and we were discovered, signed, played on the radio, all that stuff. And then there was this fateful day where we were asked to headline a show by a young band, and the idea was that we were going to pull a crowd because we were a big deal. And we had ridden this wave, but then the wave had started to taper out and hit shore, and lots of money was required, and I was unemployed and all this sort of stuff. And anyway, so I got really drunk before this show, and no one came. They came for the young band, but then when it came time for us, the big headliner, to play, there was near no one there. And we had come off this huge ride of sold out shows, and we were just playing too often. And anyway, so I had a panic attack on stage, drunk. My mouth went dry. I couldn't sing. Just the whole thing fell apart. And I cancelled all our shows the next day. I was just like, I don't know how I can ever do this again. And so working my way back into being creative, I started writing again, and I started drawing again, because I could do that by myself and no one was watching, and I didn't have to rely on bandmates to turn up or crowds to turn up. And I put a comic together called Badly Beaten Boy that near no one saw. I was working in a comic book store, and I put it on the shelves. But something happened over the course of the comic was that my drawing from the start versus my drawing at the end got a lot better. And I couldn't believe it. This was like, practicing actually makes you better and stuff. So cut to a couple of years later, I'd put a few novels out focusing on my writing. But then I wanted to get better at drawing. So I put this comic out that's on your screen. Well, I didn't put it out so much as I just made it, and I had it sitting on my hard drive. It's called The Devil's Toilet. And same thing sort of happened. By the end of it, I was a better illustrator than I was at the start. And then Hayden, who's here with us, he came into my comic book shop and put Rick McClune #1 on the shelf. And I picked it up and I looked at it and I loved it. And I wondered, what's this Reverie thing all about? And so I messaged Gary and I said, hey, I've got this comic called The Devil's Toilet. I've been sitting on it for a while, but I like what you guys are doing. And is there any chance you would consider putting it out? And not only did Gary put it out, but he became one of my biggest supporters, inspirers, mentors, everything. And he's really pushed me to not only keep going with Devil's Toilet, but he's given me opportunity after opportunity, including working with Dave, which was intimidating to begin with, and then was just like a dream, an absolute, like just a lesson in writing and collaborating, and brought me back to creating with someone, which, you know, I hadn't done since back in the music days. And, you know, it has inspired, I've been collaborating heaps with Hayden as well and with artists on the different projects. So I couldn't be more stoked to be part of Reverie and working on all these awesome books. It's a great time.
What is it like, you know, literally working with Australian royalty that, you know, has been in the industry for 35 years. And then on top of that goes, I'll tell you what, you can actually even play in my sandbox with my toys as well. Like, what was that kind of like when you got, you know, we got that opportunity and everything?
Well, getting it off the ground was a bit like, I was very enthusiastic, and we talked about it. And I just wrote 3 scripts, bang, here they are. Oh no, actually 1 script, here it is, bang, with barely even consulting Dave. And then we sort of got together and said, no, let's actually do this together. The whole idea of that was daunting to me. I was like, on 2 levels, I was, please don't sound like an idiot, me, when I'm talking. And I was like, about Dave, please don't be a dick, please don't be a dick. not only was he not a dick, it was a glorious
it's right
experience.
here, you realize, by the way.
I didn't know him, and I was signing up. I was signing up for this big deal, and I was just like, I just wanted it to be a symbiotic relationship, and it was, my wife hated it because I would spend 3 hours on the phone every Saturday morning with Dave, but it was a blast. We created worlds together, and just we would have just ideas, and then just like there's a castle in it, and then Dave said, "What if the castle was floating?" And I was just like, "We can do that," and he's like, "We can do anything." And we just had so much fun. It was a blast, and I hope that comes across in the book, and I really think it will, because we put our hearts and souls into it. So yeah,
that's awesome. And for you, Dave, what is it like to kind of hand over the reins and let someone play with characters that you've created that have been in the industry for so long? What is it like for you to go, okay, well, I'm still involved, but you're actually passing that baton on to someone else to kind of do a lot of the work?
Well, in some ways, that was precisely why I wanted to get back into comics, was this point where the characters have been around for almost 40 years, and you start to think, okay, 40 years from now, I'll probably be 6 foot under. But it would be nice to think that the characters get used. And there are so many, these golden age characters that are pretty much defunct. And, we may know of them, but very few people in the Australian community do. And I think that's a great shame. And back in the 80s and 90s, the stuff that was being done by Reverie, by Cyclone, Fantastique, that there was a lot of books coming out. You could go on the newsstands and you might see 10 or 15 books at any given moment, from Australian, and in every damn newsstand, and then you go and find them in the in the comic shops, and they wouldn't be buried in an Australian section in the corner. They would actually be in amongst the Marvels and the DCs. And so when we started doing Cyclone, it sort of began as an anthology, but myself and particularly Gary Challoner, he had the Jackaroo series, who I'm sure you're familiar with. Southern Squadron characters would appear in the Jackaroo storylines, and then the Jackaroo characters like Flash Domingo and that would then appear in the Squadron. And so it was almost like they become so sort of interwoven that we found it. That was kind of why ultimately they became so interwoven. Gary ended up saying, "Bugger it, let's just, you write and I'll draw, and we'll just do the Southern Squadron." And so in the early days, there was this sort of natural sense of collaboration anyway, because, and I find that always works well with an artist as well. Like when I was working with Glenn Lumsden for almost 20 years, we would meet every morning for breakfast, and we'd have coffee, and we always end up at the pub in the evening. And so you talk about what you were working on at that time, and you discuss. So if I had a story, even in its infant stage, I'd be talking to Glenn about it or to Gary about it, and they'd be suggesting, "Hey, this would be good if," and whether or not you necessarily took on all the ideas, you'd try to accommodate where you could. And so I think with Rob and I, that what we were both trying to do was say yes to everything that each other suggested as much as possible. And as I said, once we'd found the voice of the characters, and I mean, for example, the Squadron were easy because I knew what their voices were, and Rob picked it up pretty quick as well. Torn was a little harder because Torn had been written by George, and Rob was sort of taking it over. So while there was a continuation of George's voice, Rob's obviously putting his own twist on it as well. And so it was finding where that landed. And then we both decided that we'd like to create some new villains, because I have a theory that, the better the villain, the better the story. That seems to be the way it works. So we probably spent, about 2 weeks where we before we even got into plotting, where we just got into the developing the characters, defining everything about them. We effectively created a little Bible where we worked out, what all of the features of the characters were, what their motives were, their dreams, their hopes, their aspirations, so that, once we're done with them, they could then be taken on by other creators as well. And so finally, by the time we got to start writing the story, the script, the plot, the plot grew organically out of the characters and their motivations and their desires to, interact. And then the biggest problem was finding that actual voice for the villains. And funny enough, some of the ways we solved it was Rob would actually start he'd start to, do it in the voice of the character. And there was one.
Okay, so Rob's a little bit crazy. We're getting from this.
There was a weird epiphany where I couldn't get across to him in normal words what I was talking about. So I was just like, right, this is how I think the guy talks. And Dave was like, wait, say that again. I was like, this is how I think the guy talks. And then we're just like, that's it, right at the late. And then, yeah, we ran from there.
But that was key because he was supposed to be like a gangster, and we were sort of thinking that this character's from another dimension, that he'd been watching too much TV, and he'd sort of modelled himself on Jimmy Cagney. But then when Rob was sort of talking, and on the written page, it wasn't quite gelling. And then I said, Rob, just how would you say it? And he started speaking. I said, that's Vinnie Jones from Lock, Stock.
Yeah.
And suddenly we realised we were in the Guns and Geezers gangster world. And the moment that clicked, suddenly the character was easy, but up until then, we weren't sure. And suddenly then we could just go through and, that's right, that's wrong. It was so easy. So,
and then we wanted that guy in every scene because he was so awesome.
Say again?
No, the character was then so awesome. We were so in love with him. We wanted him in every scene. And
That's awesome. So Gary, all the guys here have seemed very appreciative of you and what you're doing. What do you have planned moving forward? Not only this year, and but we talked a lot off air in regards to how to build up a publishing company, and what are your plans for the future, and are you going to get more creators in, or are you going to just stay with certain titles at the moment? And what do you got in store?
Look, when you look at creators, all the people here, of course, is the fantastic aspect of this whole venture is the people that you have. It's like a family, and that's what we sort of try to project. And it's not just me; it's everybody, and that's what brings it sort of feeds the that feel, and people are attracted to it. So yes, there will be other people in, and I will do that simply because it gives the opportunity for others to join the comic sort of side of creativity, because it is a very hard hobby or business, or whichever way you look at it, to get into. It's not something that you're going to make millions out of it, as we all know. There's definitely, it's something there. But my point of view is I just want to create comics, and with everybody that we've got around us at the moment are absolutely awesome and brilliant, and they will get that across, and we will get more readers out of it, which is what we're doing. Now, just briefly, I mean, Peter Lawson, he was drawing, even though he didn't get much published, but he was drawing comics back in the 80s. 80s. No, nothing was published. But you did try for places like Inkspots. Is that correct? Yes.
Yeah, I did.
All about it. Yeah. Well, guess what? I knew all about it back then because I saw some of your work, and that's what. And this is what it's all about. For someone that hasn't done anything before, bang, have a go at Torn. Simple as that. You've got to start somewhere, and it's very hard to start anywhere in this business to get anywhere, as we all know. Same with Hayden and Rob, and the stuff that they do is absolutely great. Dave's fantastic, and the beauty about it is that there's so many ideas out there that we can play on and create. It's just never ending, and that's what we're here for. We want to give the readers what I would call a feel-good comic. A lot of comics nowadays don't have that. It's a hard one to explain, but when you get a comic and it's a good comic, it's a beautiful creative experience reading it. It's simple as that. And what's happened is I certainly, apart from Dave, who's been for ages and knows what he's doing, a lot of people I think appreciate the fact that they get a chance. And obviously because Rob and Hayden's here, I make them suffer because I give them synopsis. This is what we got to do. This is what we're going to write for this comic. go ahead and do it. Dave doesn't know it yet, but I've got a few for him too. but you know, for instance, Hayden's got a couple. He's got a horror comic that's coming out soon, which once it's been scripted, and we've got a car, sort of a Mad Maxy sort of car one that's going to come out, which I'm going to utilise and go to a lot of the. I've got to try to get away from the standard comic scene. I've got to expand out, and that's what we need to do for readers. And we've got a car Mad Maxy sort of world that we're building now, which Hayden's doing a fantastic job. He's basically got a little bit of a Bible to follow, and then he can do what he wants. And that's what I like to do and give to people. It's a wonderful thing seeing how people create things. And Rob's in the same boat. He's got a couple of really good comics. Not only that he's doing himself, which is there's his new one coming out that's on screen now. Rob's got a couple of issues that he's got to write, and one of them is going to be a sort of a time travel experience, which is going to be good, and the other one's sort of it is a time travel thing, but it ends up at another place, which is going to be excellent, I think, later on. Hayden's got a interesting horror one that he's got to write, which he loves. Also, Hayden is, if we go back to our little collection here, I've got I'll just get rid of that one and we'll go to this one. This is that's the time travel one, the comic that's coming out. That's a variant cover. That's Larrikin and Just. That's going to be I've sort of got to the point now where we've got to put out a few science, because I love science fiction and I haven't had a chance to do that yet. And I've been very privileged and lucky to work with both and everybody that we've sort of jumped on board, because it's a family. Dave will know this, because in the early days we had that experience, and it was a beautiful way of doing things, and it just felt natural, and that's what it does now, and that's why it's such a good feeling. That's the comic up on screen now. That is one of the comics that'll be out. Hopefully, we'll see how we go, but it should be out by the end of the year. We've got hopefully a tentatively very good artist doing that one, so that'll be interesting. Apart from that, we've also, as you know, Hayden I've gone to Hayden and basically asked him, which is the cover on the screen now, is a offshoot of Torn. Now, when we originally, I had Torn written probably back in the 80s, and I was going to do as with most kids at the time, you wanted to do some sort of superhero sort of thing, because that's the way it was in those days. And, we come up with Torn, which was an interesting character, and he's flawed, of course. However, the villains and the characters that were in the comic have become very popular. And thanks to Pete, very much so thanks to Pete, because what's happened is we give them a bit of an idea, say, look, this character is this, see what you come up with. And of course, Peter's come up with these character designs that have been excellent, and he's been pretty spot on most of the time. And what's happened is that there's been a couple of characters that have been very popular, which was Red Gum and Mr. I. Mr. I, he was born with no eyes, has no eyes, but he is a detective. He'll do a lot of jobs that you ask him to, and of course he doesn't ask for pay or money, etc., but he does ask for eyes. So you could ask him, can you find this person or find that person? He'll say yes. That'll either cost you your left eye or your right eye or both eyes, depending on what he has to do. So it's a very interesting it's one of those interesting ones which Hayden has done an excellent job on writing the first 3 issues. Now the first issue is at the colouring stage. The second issue is I believe at the inking stage, and it won't be too long, and hopefully we'll have those 3 issues up for a Kickstarter later on in the year.
All 3 at once?
Most likely, because what we'll do is we'll put them up and see what happens.
Wow.
Look, with Kickstarter, with Kickstarter, I'm new at it and I'm experimenting. I'm learning from everybody else, and I think this year will be a good year for Kickstarter for us because we've got quite a few. The biggest selling comic that we had is for the virus, because we've slowed down obviously because of the virus. There's no as everybody knows, there's no tables or anything, so it's a little bit hard. And plus we've got our website down because we're revamping it and redoing it. Our biggest selling title is Toby, of course. And for those that have seen Toby, you can understand why. But we use Toby in two ways, is that we attract a lot of the younger readers and families, as in mums and dads who actually, from what we gather, they read it to their kids, etc., etc. But we also use Toby for educational purposes, which I send out, probably 30 or 40 issues to a lot of places that actually teach art to the kids. I've just sent Hoyver's Comics down to Warrnambool for an area down there who they actually teach kids how to draw comics and characters and all that, which they give to the kids. Now, we're hoping that not so much maybe, won't help me in that sense or help us, but it will help us eventually because it will bring new people into the fold. And, that's just something that we're trying to do and trying to, behind the scenes sort of thing. And that's a really good thing because we've probably, with Toby, we've probably printed just under 5,000. We haven't sold that many, but we've printed under 5,000 and we've probably sold half. And we're very lucky with Toby. We're very lucky with Toby because on the second issue, what happened was I experimented and we got something like 23 fantastic artists that did covers for it. And of course, we printed 100 of each issue, through the creative side of the print on demand. And we're very fortunate we got rid of most of them. So that was a really good experiment. So it's all learning.
Incentive covers always seem to be a popular thing these days. Now we're almost at our hour. So what I would love to do, and we'll start down at Rob, is just to give creators, whether it's writers, artists, or anything, one creative tip on how to get into the industry or something that you've learnt while you've been in the industry. I'd love to go around and everyone just give one quick tip.
Well, how to get in? The Australian comic scene, I'm finding out, is very supportive of each other. So I would reach out to others who are making comics because I've not run into... I come from music, as I said, and all the bands seem to hate each other. It was very competitive. We were all fighting for the one slot, the front bar of the SB or whatever the case may be. But there's plenty of shelf space. There's plenty of... The internet is infinite. Everyone's very supportive. Everyone's offering variant covers to each other and, I'll do a 4-page story for your anthology. So it's kind of like I work in a comic book store and it can be daunting for new readers to look at the rack. And I just say, pick the one with the prettiest picture and pick it up. Even though it's issue 54, 2 issues in, you'll know what's going on and you'll either love it or hate it. And it's kind of that way, I think, with getting in. Just make something and get amongst it. And just like for me, it was a case of the more I was drawing, the better I got. The more I was writing, the better I got. And then once I shared it with other people, I learned a little bit about how they did it. I learned a lot about how Dave did it. And I took the bits that I thought, like with Dave, for instance, some of the stuff he does, I've now completely stolen, and it's how I do it. And because it just it just blew my mind. I was like, that's how you do it.
Well, that's a good tip. Steal what works.
Yeah.
There's tip number 1. Steal what works.
Yeah.
I think you're missing this plot, but
Yeah, more just how to make it, not so much
not the plot.
Stealing.
Yeah, we're not saying steal the plot. That's cool.
Well,
Peter,
one of the magic. Sorry, go.
Peter, what about you? What being Dawn's been the first thing you've drawn? What would you say for any budding artist that wants to create a comic book? What advice would you give them?
Like Rob just said, reach out to the comic creators out there. I've been amazed since I started doing torn, and I hadn't drawn anything, literally touched a paper. And since I've been doing it, people, like I've collaborated, I've had Darren Close in torn, and what I've learned off someone like him giving me feedback, like talking to people like Dave and what they've gone through, everyone's so supportive. You might look at your stuff and think, everyone else is doing so much better than I can't compete with all that. You don't have to. You've got a visual voice. Use it. Learn from what everyone else is doing. And as you do it, you're just going to get better. And enjoy it. Do it for fun. And then people are going to appreciate that. People will look at your work and go, that issue was good. This one's better. This one's better. I get people telling me they really love Torn 1, and I'll be honest, I look at it and hate it. But, you know, that was a couple of years ago now. I look at, and I'm into issue 3, and that's the artistic voice is so much different. And that's by doing it and by listening to other people that are working. Like, everyone gives you stuff that you can steer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And Dave, being someone that's been in the industry for so long, how do you how can people come to you for advice? Like, you know, are you open and receptive to that, or you know, how you deal with that type of you know, being, you know, someone a lot of us would look up to within the industry, especially the Australian industry. You know, how do you go about you know, giving advice type of thing?
I imagine virtually everybody here is, you know, is listening in is on Facebook, and there's probably one of a number of different groups that are out there sort of specialising in comics. If you see my name there, just, you know, message me, and I'll talk to anybody about comics anytime. I've always been happy to share. I was one of the ways that I broke into America was I had mates like John Ostrander and Mike Grell and you know, even Todd McFarlane, and these guys were the ones who sort of, you know, gave me introductions. Like, I landed the Phantom because the editor of the Spider-Man book that Todd was working on, Todd said you would get on with him, give him a call, and, you know, one thing led to another. So I've always repaid their favour. You know, if it's the Yanks aren't too proud to help me out, I'll do the same. All of the early Squadron stuff, we got covers given. You know, like Jerry Ordway just did a cover for us because Mike Grell said, you know, that might be fun to do for us. And this was when he was doing Superman. You know, and so as Rob said, so many people out there are very generous. They will do, you know, covers. They will do work with each other. I would say to anybody breaking in, a writer writes and a drawer draws. So if you're not writing, then you're not a writer. And so, and if you're not drawing, you're not an artist. So just get doing it. And if you don't have anything to draw, find a writer out there. There will be plenty of them who, you know, and team up. And the other thing I think I'd finish off with is you probably got 20 really shitty stories in you, and the sooner you can get through those, the better. So don't make your first story a 72-page opus. I've seen too many people do that, and then halfway through they abandon it because they realise it's crap. You know, 8-page stories, you know, do lots of short little pieces. You'll find them easier to get into anthologies and to get published. And the other thing is you'll learn so much. It is really, really hard to write a good, solid 8-page story. It's really easy to write a rambling 72-page thing which has little moments of goodness in it, but is basically, you know, all over the place. So I'd say don't try to bite off too much. You know, do some short little bite-sized stories. Accept that the first one is going to be worse than the second, that the second will be worse than the third, and you know your goal is to get through those first few, and eventually you'll go, oh my god, I'm actually getting pretty good at this.
That's great. And Hayden, being a writer, what advice would you give someone that's, you know, about to write their first comic book?
Sort of going off what Dave kind of said already, in terms of just write that thing you want to write, but more than that. So when I first wrote Chimera, that was at the end of years of just sort of like this existential, like, you know, what's the point? You know, when you get in that muck where you feel like you just can't write, or you don't want to write, or you shouldn't write, But if you've been bitten by that bug, then there's no shrugging it off. So eventually I just put it down on paper. I said, stuff it. I found an artist. And one thing leads to another. And then I met Gary, and then I met Rob, and you get opportunities. But then each opportunity is going to be challenging as well. Like it never becomes easy. So being prepared to just push through when it's hard. Gary mentioned before that, he gives me and Rob these one-line synopses and says, just go and make something. It's amazing, but it's also terrifying. Like I've recently just written out like a 15-page Word doc based on the car sci-fi thing that he mentioned before. And it's sort of this period of time where you're lost and you're thinking, like, how do I make something out of all of these ideas? And it's like it's exciting, but it's also terrifying. And once you get through that,
it's like Mr. Squiggle with words.
Yeah.
It's really messy. Like
trying to create the characters as well. They look.
It's really messy, and just ride that messy, scary. Wave. Like you'll get through it and you'll figure out what you're trying to say and why it's important. And if it's important to you, then it's gonna resonate, which is kind of what Peter said before. Like if you're enjoying what you're doing and you feel like you have something to say, then I think people are gonna notice when you put that thing out there.
Awesome, man. That's really good advice. And Gary, what would you say to people that would be even crazy, to think that they could start a publishing house, let alone just a comic? What would the one tip of advice would you give them?
It's an interesting thing because there's quite a few people that are starting up now and putting out publishing indie comics now. So it is a sort of a growing market because it's harder to get into the big companies now, and the creative side of it is fantastic because people now have got the opportunity to go out and even print their own stuff now because it is fairly reasonably cheap and it's easier to do. What I would say to anybody now is that the most important thing is that if you've written a story or you've drawn a comic and it's sitting on your desk at home, it is useless. You have to get it out, get it published, get it in someone else's comic, get it somewhere, because that is now your journey to learn the correct way and possibly icing on the cake. You might get a movie out of it, you just don't know, but it's no good. We all know here, everybody here knows that if it's sitting on a desk at home, not going anywhere, it's useless. So all I can say is don't muck around, get off your ass, get out there and get it published yourself or give it to someone to publish it, because you've got to be seen to get anywhere. So that's basically.
I wish I had the Shia LaBeouf, just do it after that speech, mate. Like, Stephen, is there anything else you want to say before we wrap up this show tonight? It's been an amazing show. Thank you to everyone that's come on. It's been really a wealth of information, which has been fantastic.
I'll echo exactly what you said, Sean. And I think it's a really good introduction to a lot of you. And if there's an opportunity down the track, which I'm sure there will be, I think we would like to give like each one of you your own individual spotlight a little bit more. I know it's great to bring everybody in, but I think there's so much more we haven't even deep dive on. Like there's so many questions we need to ask about, where do you see the Australian market going? Where do you see this happening? And we haven't had a chance to touch on it. So it would be really, really good if we could like peel off one by one, divide and conquer almost one by one, each of you. And if you think about doing that in the future.
Of course, anytime.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, guys. I appreciate your time. I know it's late on a Sunday night, and a lot of us have to get up and work tomorrow. So we really do appreciate the time that you give us and everyone else. And we're looking forward to seeing what you guys bring out, and we will definitely have each and every one of you back on again. That would be amazing. So thank you very much, guys, and to everyone that watched. thank you again for watching. If you haven't already, make sure you click that subscribe button and hit that bell to be notified when we go live. Next week we have Kieran Jack on, and we're going to be talking about The Apparition, which is a comic satire comic, which is going to be very, very interesting and something new to talk about. So we will see you all next week.
Cheers.